Hi, it's David with Radon Safe Homes and Businesses. Um, this video, and it might be two parts, regards radon removal systems, what is called radon mitigation. So, um, just to go over the basics, so you get a good understanding of what happens um, to your home when you need a radon system. So, um, you've tested high for radon. Now, what you do? And I'll start with homes that have basements. There's a couple different ways to mitigate a home. The most widely used methods are called subslab depressurization systems or drain tile depressurization systems. And these systems basically they pull air from underneath the foundation, underneath the basement slab, and as they're pulling air, they move towards the radon system itself, the vent pipe, which is usually a 3 or 4 inch PVC pipe, and then gets vented and pulled up through the pipe, through the fan that is creating the vacuum. And then once it hits the exhaust pipe, gets vented to the outside air and gets diluted very quickly. So typically, again, it's a 3 to 4 inch PVC pipe in most cases for residential, and the pipe itself sometimes is routed through an attached garage, through the garage attic space, and then through the roof. So from the outside, it looks like a plumbing vent. Sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes you have to route it to the outside. This is if you don't have an attached garage, or let's say the basement's all finished off kind of near where the garage and house meet, where there's just not a way to install it without doing major damage or deconstruction, which most people don't want to end up repairing. Then the pipe would go to the outside, fan is outside. Again, pipe goes up past the roof. It has to be a certain distance away from windows or above windows, typically 10 feet away from windows or 4 feet above them, and a minimum 10 feet off the ground. So that's if you have a ranch home. If you have a 2-story home, sometimes the pipe has to go up past the second floor roof, again, depending on where everything is laid out. And this is because, let's say you test at 5 picocuries, and the action level is 4. So you're at 5 and you want to get a radon system to lower your exposure. That's what made it through the concrete, made it into your basement. What's coming out of the vent pipe could be 1,000 picocuries. So you don't want to take a chance of that concentrated radon coming back into the home through a door, through a window, that kind of thing. And that's typically why we have to be above a roof, just because, again, the exposure there would be dangerous. So basically, again, we start, let's say you do a simple system off the sump pit. I prefer not to do it that way if we can avoid it. Sometimes you have to. You would seal the sump pit airtight, which usually includes submersible pumps in the pit. The lid should be clear as glass to be able to see in it, or have a viewing port. That kind of thing needs to be sealed up airtight to where there's no air leakage, usually with silicone caulk. And then you cut a hole through the lid to fit the pipe, and then the pipe gets inserted. You pre-cut the pipe and put a rubber coupler on it and connect the pipe with that rubber coupler. So if you need to get into the pit, you can take that radon piping out of the lid very easily. It's already pre-cut. And then the pipe goes to the foundation wall, is usually clamped to the foundation wall to where it's nice and sturdy, or clamped to a floor joist, that kind of thing, and then does a 90-degree turn or 45-degree turn to get to the outside. Once it's outside, you would typically do another 45-degree turn to get it, the pipe to go vertical. You mount the radon fan, and then the fan would have a couple of 45s typically to go back to the wall, and then it gets clamped to the wall. Pipe goes up along the side, again, pipe up above the roof. There has to be a disconnect at the fan, so electrical connection, toggle switch type thing. Weatherproof would be outside by the fan to turn it off. That way, if you have to service the fan, replace it, what have you, you can turn the power off, take the fan off without any danger, and then once the fan's reinstalled, rewired, you can turn that toggle switch back on. Then you have an inside system that same way would start up in the basement if the sump pit's anywhere near the garage, and it would just go through the garage and attic and roof again if you were to route that way. Now, if you were to route through the garage, it's okay for the fan to be in the garage as long as there's no livable space, no conditioned space above the garage. and then, but typically we route them up into the garage attic space, and then the fan again goes through the roof. So you're going to be roofing, putting a roof flashing on that pipe on the roof, making sure that's all weather tight, liquid tight, so no leaks coming through the roof, that kind of thing. So that's a drain tile sump pit system. The main difference with a subslab depressurization system is where we actually core a hole. It's a precision cut. With us, it's typically a 4-inch hole that we cut through the slab. With a big hammer drill, you're vacuuming with a HEPA filtered vacuum at the same time. Sometimes you're venting that vacuum to the outside, and you're making sure that it's basically dust free. That silica dust can be dangerous, so you don't want any dust floating around in the basement while you're drilling. And then once you're through that slab, once you're through the hole, you're creating what's called a suction point. You're creating an air pocket, an air void underneath the slab. If there's gravel and drain tile, then you're just pulling out maybe a half bucket to a bucket of material. Don't have to remove a lot for the system to work really well. If there's sand or clay, with sand, you're sucking out 4 or 5 buckets of material, digging with your hand. Typically, then we're cutting a 6-inch hole through the slab. And then once we dig out the sand, we actually line it with gravel, so the radon fan itself does not pull any air or sand up the pipe while it's moving the air. With fans, you have 2 types, usually a high air volume or a fan that moves air very easily, has more air flow. And then you have high vacuum fans, which are made for sand or clay type situations. So if you were dealing with sand, you're going to have a high vacuum fan on there. Again, have a big sump pit or suction point, and that's where the radon vent pipe gets inserted into the hole. And we have fittings that would go from a 6-inch down to a 3-inch pipe and get seal that pipe fitting airtight to get into the slab. And then same thing. If you are going through a garage, once you go from the basement side into the garage, that's considered a firewall. And you have to protect that. Anything larger than 1.5 inch pipe, you have to install metal fire collars on that pipe with fire retardant material. Basically, if there was a fire in your garage and it was hot enough to melt the pipe, once the pipe would melt, that fire collar material would explode and fill in that hole with fire retardant material. It's usually a 1-hour burn, which would usually save your house. And so it's very important to install these fire collars. And then again, if the firewall is on the ceiling, then you have to do a fire collar on top of the pipe as it goes through the ceiling into the attic space. I've heard comments from competitors, in the past where they're like, "Hey, we can caulk it. That's fine." No, it's not. This could save a life. This could save someone's home. So the expense of a fire collar is worth it. They're trying to get a job based on price, selling price versus quality and following building codes and things like that. We never cut corners. Our products are top of the line. I can sleep easily at night, and we install fire collars. Even if a home is what they would consider grandfathered in without using fire collars, I'm putting a fire collar on that wall if I put a hole through it, if it's drywall and whatnot, because again, I want to protect the occupants of the home. I'll lose a job before I don't do that. The electrical work has to be up in the attic space if the fan's in the attic. If you have an outlet on the wall and you can plug the fan in there and not have to get an electrician or not have to do new wiring, then that's perfectly fine. Again, as long as there's no conditioned space above the attic of the garage. And then you run the pipe up through that garage roof. And then flashing, you have to be trained on how to do that. Make sure you know how to flash a piping properly. No caulk flashings are very popular. You nail them down, and sometimes, in older roofs, or shingle might crack a little bit, that kind of thing. Then you're going to get out some roofing caulk and caulk it. You want to make sure, again, that there's no leaks at where the pipe is penetrating through the roof. So bottom line is that a radon system creates a vacuum, creates that negative air field underneath the slab of the basement. So if you have a crawl space, and let's say there's a concrete slab in the crawl space, same thing, exact same thing happens. It's just a shorter pipe run. If there's open dirt or clay in the crawl space, that's when we would install drain tile through that crawl space and connect our pipe to that so we can pull air from that crawl space. And then on top of that, from wall to wall, from foundation wall to foundation wall, we install plastic sheeting. It has to be a certain thickness. You have to overlap it. You have to tape it on that overlap. And then we cut that hole for the pipe to wrap it around the pipe. And again, that gets airtight, air secured, and then we can move air through that drain tile system. The sheeting actually gets pulled down to the ground, to the soil, and again, but it allows us to move air. If you don't have that drain tile in there, you're just going to pull the plastic down to the earth and not move any air. So you have to have that drain tile installed if it's a dirt or clay type crawl space. And then let's say you have a house on a slab. Exact same technique again, just less pipe run. You're coring a hole through that slab. Some slab homes that I've been in and commercial buildings actually have sump pit and a drain tile system, which is great. Then if we don't know there's gravel under the slab, then that might be where the system goes. If we have any recollection or maybe not recollection, if we have any comments from the owner or plans to where we know there is probably gravel under the slab, then again, we can core through a slab, route that system up through a closet, like in a bedroom closet or something, and again, up through the roof. Sometimes you're routing in a closet, laundry room, going out the back of the house, that type of thing, and then routing it outside, all depending on what the customer wants. So bottom line is, on a radon mitigation system, you are going to pull air from underneath the foundation, the slab, a crawl space, membrane, all of those type of things. And so it's a very simple technology. Another way to get rid of radon is to pressurize the house. And you can do that with an air-to-air exchanger. In the northern climate, you have a heat recovery ventilation system because it conditions the air before it has the air enter the home, whether it's really cold out or really hot and humid, that type of thing. You have to have radon levels that are pretty low, just a little bit above 4 for those to really work. And to be able to do the job, you have to have so many air exchanges per hour for it to work. If you have levels of 10 or something like that, that's not going to really do the job. You have to have a regular mitigation system in cases like that. And then there's also techniques where if the weather is relatively warm all year round, you could do a sub-slab pressurization system where you're actually turning that fan upside down, pulling air from outside at ground level, and so it's less obtrusive outside. And you're actually pushing air, and then you can have the fan in the basement. Actually, you're pushing air from the taking from the outside and pushing it underneath the slab, and pressurizing the slab to where the radon can enter the home. You have to make sure that every inch, every nook and cranny is sealed airtight. Otherwise, you're just going to blow air from outside into the house. That's one technique, but I know some people that have used that successfully in cases when they needed to. But again, it's got to be in a warm climate. If it's gets cold outside, like here in Wisconsin, you're going to have an ice skating rink in the basement if you try something like that. So I actually know someone who did that in Wisconsin, and they had ice on this, literally had ice on the slab, so it was not a good way to do it. So that's the basics of radon mitigation: creating an airflow, depressurizing the air underneath the slab. What's really nice about radon systems, I should mention, is that it pulls a lot of moisture out from underneath the slab. So it helps keep moisture levels lower in the basement and in the house, which is a huge benefit. When you have really good gravel and drain tile, I've had people with new construction homes that didn't even end up getting a dehumidifier because it just wasn't needed. This is taking that air that contains moisture out before it can get into the home. So it's better than a dehumidifier. In my home, which is 55 years old now, our dehumidifier ran all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And after I installed the system, this is back in early 2000, within a few weeks, the dehumidifier shut off, and I thought the bucket was full, so I went to dump it. And it was only about half full, but the dehumidifier turned off. And I was like, that's strange. And then my wife mentioned that it didn't smell as bad in the basement. That musty smell was gone. And I was like, oh, she said that, I kind of noticed the same thing. And now our dehumidifier runs about half the time, maybe not even that, in the summertime when it's humid outside. And in the winter, dehumidifiers are unplugged. So we're saving quite a bit of energy with our radon system running. My levels were 30 on the basement. I then tested the first floor thinking, what's the levels upstairs with levels like that in the basement? Levels upstairs were over 20. So I installed my system, that first system I ever installed, through the basement slab, had a small crawl space to go through, finished off the crawl space with plastic, made a suction point in the crawl space, so we had 2 suction points. Then the pipe went into the garage, up the garage wall, through the roof, fans up in the attic space, And now whenever I test, it's typically below 1 picocurie. So basically outside air levels. And our crawl space, which was just an empty crawl space, has a false floor in it, floating floor if you want to call it that. And we store clothes in there and sleeping bags and things like that. So we gained a lot of space in our basement by throwing things in the crawl space, because now it can be used for storage. You pull clothes out of there and things like that. Doesn't smell, no musty smell at all. So again, these radon systems do a fantastic job. I did not invent them; somebody else did. But if you do them right, you can it can really help your house be more livable, more comfortable. People just sense that, they say they just feel like their home is more cozy and just feels better, because again, you can't sense radon, but you can definitely sense moisture and things like that. So any questions, any comments, please leave them below. And that is basically it. As always, have a great day.